Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are pleased to have you. We know we have quite the international audience. We're welcoming you. So let me not say good morning because I know we have people from all sorts of parts in the world. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Damilola Busari, and today we're having a conversation around ESG, ethical leadership, and corporate culture, shaping the future of effective governance. We are Duale, Ovia, and Alex-Adedipe, the corporate governance practice area, and we've put together this webinar today to ensure that we're able to have those conversations, especially because the business terrain across the globe now pays keen attention to ESG and, of course, corporate governance. We have distinguished speakers that will be touching on today's webinar topic. They will be looking at areas such as ESG integration, ethical leadership, corporate social responsibility, corporate governance, and of course, government and the regulatory aspect of all of this. Thank you once again for joining us. I'd like to let you know that we have, like I said, it's going to be a conversation today. So it's going to be very interactive. This means that it's not just going to be as speakers discussing the topic, but you have a chance to also chime in, share with us your contributions and your questions, if any, relating to today's topic. And we do hope that at the end of the day, it will be a very fruitful conversation, effective conversation, and we'll be able to plot a beautiful way forward. I'm going to go on right ahead to introduce our speakers. We have joining us from Portugal, Maria Figueiredo. She is the Counsel of CMS Portugal. She heads the tax teams at CMS Portugal. She has over 20 years of experience in the investment and tax structuring practice area. She specializes in tax advisory for oil and gas and renewable energy projects across Lusophone Africa. Maria is also a member of the ESG task force, and she focuses on sustainability in business, and she's also contributed to legal advisory in significant transactions, including maritime boundary treaties and projects in Angola. Please welcome with me, everyone, Maria Figueiredo. You could just say a good hello in the chat box so we know that you are here following the conversation. Let's give a warm welcome to Maria. Hello, Maria. Thank you very much for doing this with us.
Hello,
next we have, thank you very much. Next we have our speaker, who is the Executive Director, Governance and Sustainability at the Sahara Group, Ejiro Gray. Ejiro is a lawyer and governance and sustainability professional who currently serves as the Executive Director, Governance and Sustainability at Sahara Group. She also heads the Sahara Group Foundation and the organization's social impact vehicle. Previously, she was Group Company Secretary, and she made history as the first graduate trainee to be appointed a director. Ejiro is a member of the Women in Energy Network, advocating for women in the energy sector, and she's also a life member of the Nigerian Conservation Foundation. As a thought leader in sustainability, Ejiro emphasizes the importance of effective advocacy for a just energy transition and the role of corporate organizations in driving socioeconomic development through social impact. Please welcome with me our second speaker, Ejiro Gray. Hello, ma'am. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Our third speaker will be with us shortly, but I will go ahead to recognize him and introduce him before he comes into the room. Mr. Kayode Olaniyan is the Principal Consultant at Avant-Garde Innovation and Technology. He's an environmental expert. UN Sustainability Development Goals advocate, and public policy influencer with experience focused on sustainability and environmental, social, and governance ESG principles. His expertise spans construction, energy, manufacturing, cement, and telecommunication sectors, where he has driven environmental compliance and sustainability initiatives for private and public sector. Kayode holds a BSc in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Wolverhampton and an MSc in Engineering Business Management from the University of Warwick. Like I said, he's the principal consultant at Avant-Garde Limited. Please welcome Mr. Olaniyan, who would also be joining us shortly. And to moderate today's discussion conversation is one who we refer to in-house as OS. She is Mrs. Omowunmi Sanni. She leads the corporate secretarial and governance practice here at Duale, Ovia, and Alex-Adedipe. She has over 20 years of experience in the legal industry. She specializes in corporate secretarial services, corporate governance, and legal compliance. She is also an active member of the Nigerian Bar Association and the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators in Nigeria, ICSAN. Please welcome with me our moderator, Mrs. Omowunmi Sanni.
Thank you, Dami. Thank you for the warm welcome. And thank you, everyone, all our participants this morning. Very excited about today's session. Thank you.
All right, so before I hand over to our moderator, I'd like to let us know that this is a conversation. If at any point you'd love to chime in or you have specific questions for our speakers, please note that we would have that happen towards the end of the session. So kindly put your comments or your questions in the appropriate chat box and we would get to it when the time is right. Let me hand over now to Mrs. Omowunmi Sanni.
Thank you very much, Dami. Thank you for the warm welcome and thank you for this opportunity to have this kind of conversation. You know, ESG is part of the trending topics of corporate governance as we know it now. And all organizations are keen into it. Obviously, corporate governance is essential to productivity, to value proposition and value add for any organization, while this conversation is very important, especially for Nigeria and across the world. So we're talking about across the world. Let's go to the meat of the matter, and I'll be starting with our first speaker, Maria. But before I ask my questions, I just want to confirm that Mr. Olaniyan has joined. If you can unmute your mic. Okay.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So glad to have you. We're a bit worried. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. We don't want to waste too much time, so we'll go straight to the questions. Maria, thank you again for joining us this morning. I'll start with the first question. How can companies effectively integrate ESG principles into their existing business models? So we'd like to hear from you on this pertinent question.
It's a very good question. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So it's a very pertinent question, and I think I'll have to take a step back and to explain what we think ESG means and how to do it. Because ultimately, when we're talking about ESG, we're talking about the metrics of sustainability. So when we're talking about integrating ESG principles, we're actually talking about a much wider meaning, which is, sustainability is the strategy, is the business strategy that we are looking for today. And I think this is an evolution. Many of the companies that have thriving business models, actually, they may have not measured it. They may not be totally conscious, and they may be now incentivized to look at it from a more determined angle. But sustainability, if they are a thriving business model, has in a way been in their business strategy so far. So I think that the integration of ESG principles starts with a reflection on how the business is resilient and is sustainable. I think that in terms of ESG principles, what has been very, very helpful, and I think this needs to start at C-level, board level, with a reflection on the strategy. So it needs to start with leadership. And maybe there's some help from the grassroots of the company that will help make these and other stakeholders. We'll talk a little bit about the role of investors, the role of supply chains. So there are a lot of incentives to trigger this discussion at the leadership or C-level or boardrooms. But it's a matter of understanding what in Europe has been called double materiality, or we can refer it as internal sustainability or external sustainability. So there's a reflection on how the business model is affected by this new paradigm of a sustainable world coming from the Paris Agreement, of a more conscious role of businesses as having an impact on society. But first of all, it starts with a reflection on how those risks and opportunities affect the business, how resilient the business model is. There are a number of good examples of, for instance, a chemical industry in the Netherlands that was transformed into a business of nutrition. Because of that reflection, taking into consideration, that the risks stemming from the world changing into a more sustainable landscape, more concerned with the environment, turned into an opportunity of shifting the business to taking advantage of the knowledge of a chemical business, to take advantage of an opportunity to turn it into something more with a more positive impact on the world to which it relates. So I think that it's a matter of strategy. It's a matter of leadership. It starts with taking conscious of what the risks of this new paradigm mean for the business and what opportunities it generates for the business. I mean, as the presenter said, I work a lot with oil and gas companies, so the energy transition is certainly not only a risk, but also an opportunity for new areas of business for these companies. And so that starts with a reflection in terms of leadership and with all the risks that come with it. In a very practical manner, I think this, and the question is very specific and very to the point, for which I thank you, it's how can companies effectively integrate ESG principles? You cannot really act when you don't know the data. And this is one of the big challenges of ESG. So we can talk about sustainability. In Europe, we talk about double materiality, or how the risks coming from this new context affect my business model, which is the internal sustainability, and how the activity of the company affects the environment and communities around it, so external sustainability. But in order to be able to do that reflection, it really starts by measuring what this means. And so this is it's one of the cruxes of the matter, which is, in fact, you need to have access to some reliable data on this double materiality. This is normally a time-consuming exercise, so it needs really the drive of the leadership, and typically, and the discussion now in terms of corporate governance is whether really do we need a chief sustainability officer to be able to integrate ESG principles in business models. And one of the issues really is, and I think we've seen it, is that in very mature companies, and I have some clients that have a very mature sustainability mindset. In fact, there is no chief sustainability officer. It's sort of ingrained in all the directors. In other companies, it was felt, although it was very mature, that you do need to have a responsible. So maybe someone at board level is, you know, the responsible for integrating all the data and making sure that everything makes sense. So in terms of corporate governance, there's different ways, different paths of being effective in terms of sustainability and ESG. In my personal opinion and experience, I think that companies need a sponsor, need someone to make it accountable in terms of sustainability. The efforts in terms of reporting, and I think I'm tying also a little bit to the second question, but the efforts in terms of having access to information, making sure that every level of the company is aware of the single strategy, of how the data needs to be aligned to lead to a single result, needs an overall responsible. So there's a number of solutions. It's very dependent on the company, but definitely I think it needs to be a strategic discussion that stems from an ethical leadership.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I like how you tied your response to our topic. You know, our topic is ESG, ethical leadership, corporate culture, right? So from your response, you're telling us that the ultimate responsibility is leadership. It stems from the board and of course, culture. It is what the leadership says that drives down to the bottom line. Thank you for that answer. So let's go on to your second question, which is, what are the key metrics and reporting frameworks that companies should follow to transparently report their ESG efforts? And how can businesses overcome the challenges of measuring impact? I know you had spoken a bit of this. You had, spoken to some of these issues in your first response, but let's just go straight to the key metrics and reporting frameworks, and you can build up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it's because everything is tied together, right? And I think that ultimately if there's a leadership discussion, it results from pressures of the market and pressures of the stakeholders and the roles that we all have to play as conscious clients, conscious consumers, to put that pressure on leadership to have to move forward. But definitely for companies, I think one of the great challenges is exactly the challenge of measuring the impact. So I think that we are in a very early stage of how to overcome this challenge. The fact that I have a tax lawyer background helps me do a parallel, that measuring impact is the same as having accounting standards. That's what we are trying to do, really. And that's why the International Financial Reporting Standards Board, that is responsible for the International Financial Reporting Standards, has also set up and has already published International Sustainability Standards 1 and 2, because what we are looking at now as a main challenge, I would say, is that we have no standardization of how to measure impact. So there's a lot of possibilities. There's a lot of choices. Even the most significant company with a sustainability area faces challenges. Things are very time consuming. There's a lot of nowadays, there's a lot of software informations that actually are helpful. For instance, in CMS Portugal, and we use it across CMS, we have a licensed software that enables our clients to, by answering online questionnaires, to gather the data in order to be compliant with the number of reporting standards, being the Global Reporting Initiative or even the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. So there will be more solutions coming up, but we are still
Okay.
in very early stages of standardization of what are the key metrics and reporting frameworks. So for a company that is giving its first steps, the easiest one, I would say, according to our experience, would be the United Nations Global Compact. It's 10 principles. The reporting is simple. It's just a report on progress. It helps you align with the Sustainable Development Goals. So it gives you a broader notion of where you stand. But then if you really mean to do this in a very way to drive change in your business, and of course being mindful that we are not talking about European companies that could be subject to the new European reporting standards for sustainability and directive on corporate sustainability reporting, which have a very specific set of rules for Europe. Anyway, I would say that the most that are actually being used for discussions with the International Accounting Standards Board to be used in a way as a framework also for the new international standards for sustainability reporting are the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI. So they have a number of frameworks for reporting on key metrics and KPIs for sustainability. It provides some flexibility because they are voluntary. Although, of course, if you have a material issue, you need to report that material issue under the format for the reporting to be credible, and that's where we are aiming at, to have a transparent and credible framework for reporting. So I would say that if you don't have a mandatory framework for reporting, which, for instance, is the struggle that we are having in Europe with the European reporting standards and companies having to be subject to a specific framework for reporting, which has challenges because it is complex, it is very time-consuming. We see a number of informatic and software solutions coming up, but again, it's still early stages. It's like the early stages of universal accounting standards, and that's where we are at the moment here. I would say that, starting with the UN Global Compact is good for alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. They're a common language. They have been widely used. They're very helpful, very specific on the targets for each SDG. And then for more detail, the Global Reporting Initiative is relevant. There are more specific metrics as TCFD, for instance, for carbon and environmental solutions. But as an overall framework, the GRI, I think, is still the most commonly used. And it allows some flexibility, so that's also good for someone that is starting. It also has industry-based principles, so it's helpful in that sense.
Thank you very much, Maria. I hear that, yes, it's the whole ESG framework, matrix, reporting standard is still a work in progress. We'll fine-tune as time goes on. Fine-tune, and of course, like you said, it's not mandatory at the moment, it's voluntary, but a lot of organizations are keen into its importance. Thank you very much. So to your third question, how are investors increasingly viewing ESG factors in making decisions about where to allocate capital? And what can companies do to attract ESG conscious investors?
Well, that's a very good point, and that links with what we were saying about, it's voluntary, but it needs to be credible, and we need to understand that, of course, although each business starts with a leadership decision, the market is pushing company leaders into having these discussions and understanding where they stand. So I think that it's and we've seen this trend. There are a number of Well, let me give you a specific example. We work with an investment fund here in Portugal that called one of our corporate governance lawyers and said, oh, we have this investor, a Swedish fund, and they are telling us that we need to have a sustainable investment policy. So we need to think about how to do this. So there is investor pressure in dealing with where the allocation of capital is. Investors are a lot more conscious of where their money is going. If you look at, for instance, the Norwegian petroleum fund, it has stopped all investment in fossil fuels. So the markets in green bonds, sustainably linked bonds, although there's lots of discussions on the credibility of the KPIs used for that type of instrument, has grown exponentially. I think that it's not an incorrect number, but there's some time ago, we were talking about the possibility of this market of investment in sustainability being worth around $12 trillion. So there's a lot of potential for allocation of capital into this type of investments, and investors are really looking into this. I think the most significant discussion, and there's a number of key thought leaders. I can think about Larry Fink at BlackRock or George Serafeim at Harvard University, have said that this is an issue where the situation needs to strike a balance. And I will also give you a very practical example about, for instance, oil and gas. Although, investors want to allocate and want to allocate capital into, of course, renewable energy or companies that are solving the problems in social communities about access to clean energy or access to clean water. There are a number of companies that need to transition, it's a process. When we're talking about the metrics, it's a process. There are some things that companies are doing well, some things that companies are doing less well. And what the discussion has been for investors is actually whether divestment in those areas of industry where there are more challenges into doing, a transition into sustainability, for instance, in oil and gas or other area, or mining, other areas that are more prone to, reputational hazards and very strict KPIs into what people are doing is really a relevant question, because if money is not allocated into helping difficult areas of business transitioning, is that the correct investment approach? So there's a lot of, there's carrots and sticks to be played here. What we can say, according to my experience and the type of issues that we have seen in the office, is that yes, increasingly in big companies that are listed in stock exchanges, that are publicly traded companies, that have, open capital, where activists, such as what happened in Shell, what happened in Exxon, where members of the board were nominated by a small activist fund supported by BlackRock. Companies that are publicly traded are very pressured by investors to have ESG conscious approaches. The thing is, in unregulated markets, the pressure probably is more supply chain, clients, other stakeholders, but there's definitely a shift here. I think the main issue is whether or not we are tolerant enough with industries that likely require more investment or more time to transition to more sustainable or ESG conscious factors. And we need to be very, very mindful that there's also solidarity needed between developing worlds and developed countries, because development of natural resources is necessary to comply with SDG 1 and taking people out of poverty in countries that are natural resources rich. So I'll just stop there. Definitely a trend, but a balance needs to be reached.
Thank you very much, Maria. So to your last question, because we're not doing great on time.
I'll be very brief.
Yeah. What role does transparency play in building trust with stakeholders regarding ESG commitments?
Oh,
What
I think
role
it
does
plays.
transparency
Yeah, I
play?
think it's the key. You know, transparency is the key, but it's a very risky area. You know, there's not a single director or manager of a company that is not very conscious of the risks of being transparent in an area in which it's not doing great or it needs to do more to become more sustainable. So it's a very thin line, and it's very difficult to strike a balance on being transparent enough or being too transparent and exposing your companies to risk. There's a lot, as you know, increased litigation, class actions, greenwashing, pinkwashing, blue washing. I mean, there's the whole rainbow of washings nowadays. So I think that managers and directors of companies are increasingly concerned on the level of transparency that is necessary to generate trust, but the level of transparency being adequate so as to not expose the companies to increased reputational risks. So it's the key to building trust, but it's a very, very, very risk-prone area. So I think it's definitely an area where directors need to rely on their trusted advisors and lawyers to understand the risks of the communication of a single words probably has an impact on the way that transparency is communicated. So definitely necessary, but it's a very, very risk-prone exercise that needs to be done very carefully.
Thank you, Maria. I hear you. I believe there should be a balance, right, when we're talking about transparency, because with corporate governance generally, even when you're talking about ESG, when you're now being specific, there has to be stakeholder trust, right? And the only way you can build that trust is if there's a bit of transparency. Your stakeholders have to understand and believe that you are doing things the right way, right? Thank you very much. So let me go to Kayode. Kayode, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good morning,
Okay.
everyone.
All right. Thank you. Good
Glad to
morning.
be
Thank
here.
you. And yeah, welcome once again. So the first question for you, given significant social issues such as poverty and unemployment, what role should corporate social responsibility play in not only alleviating these issues, but also in aligning with global ESG standards?
Oh, thank you so much. Good morning once again, and thank you to DOA for putting this together. It's been very insightful so far listening to the first speaker. Speaking to these significant social issues, I think going back to even how some of these issues emanated from a root cause viewpoint, some of the security challenges that we face here, and also speaking to poverty and unemployment, some of them can be attributed to environmental issues that were not fixed initially. So thinking about the oil spill in the Niger Delta and how that has culminated into security challenges with militancy, and also thinking about desertification up north, and then how that then segues into some of the challenges we have with the herdsmen and the farmers, and also in the north central region, where there's a lot of erosion, and that causes some of this poverty and unemployment issues emanating from land use, for example. So I say this to say that some of these environmental challenges have then caused us some social problems or security related problems, and CSR initiatives shouldn't just be a box tick exercise of well, let's just do this because it's nice to do. It's important that, they align with ESG standards. Looking at the 17 SDGs, for example, they are very strategic and methodical, looking at no poverty, zero hunger, equalities, and even going down to, partnership for the goals. They're very intentional, and, aligning, company strategy, company CSR strategies with these, goals or ESG standards would go a very, very long way. And, also speaking to some of these CSR activities, it's not just a box tick exercise, like I said earlier. There needs to be needs analysis first. What does the community or what does your stakeholder really, really need? It's not just about what you want to do. Of course, there are better ways to align it with what the community needs are or what the stakeholder needs are, vis-a-vis what works best for the sector or the company you work for. Of course, we are seeing the banks doing more work around financial inclusion, financial literacy, because it speaks to their own bottom line. We are also seeing the tech companies doing more initiatives that are focused on STEM-related activities. Of course, that would add a lot of value to the community and also to their own stakeholders and shareholders. But then there needs to be very clear needs analysis of what do people actually need, or what does the stakeholder really, really require. And also speaking to some of the community-focused CSR, of course, there are a lot of long-term social benefits, relating to healthcare, education, and environmental sustainability. And of course, this then turns to resilient communities based on, focusing those CSR activities or initiatives to achieve those goals. And we're also seeing a very big shift, where a lot of key players are saying, oh, don't say CSR anymore, because it's giving it sort of a tokenistic approach. It should probably be called sustainability, and a lot of companies are then changing, the name from CSR, from corporate social responsibility, to sustainability, because it's more encompassing, talking to people, planets, and also profits. Also, I think that strategic partnerships, would go a very, very long way, because, you can't do all of this alone. There needs to be collaboration with NGOs, with government stakeholders, and also international organizations, to ensure that there's a broader reach and that compliance, is also carried out in tandem with global best practice. Of course, important to align this with, the ESG standards, the UN SDGs, like I said earlier, and also, perhaps the IFC performance standards, that are, a list of principles that companies need to adhere to. And it's also important to not look at this as, oh, we're just trying to raise money, let's just tick all the boxes, or we're just trying to get a permit or an approval. It goes a lot, far beyond that. And companies also, are starting to reap the benefits of doing CSR the proper and appropriate way, because looking at the service profit chain, wherein if your staff or your employees are happy, they are more likely to deliver good quality of service, and then that then turns into more revenue and more profits for the business. And once your stakeholders and shareholders and community are happy based on the returns on the investment from the CSR, you're more likely to, thrive as a business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there are two things I've taken from your answer. To ensure we don't have a box ticking exercise, companies need to get data and analyze that data to help with their CSR. That is very essential. Absolutely. And of course, the second important thing is also brand reputation. Once your stakeholders are happy with you, it elevates your brand. Thank you very much. Okay. So quickly, the second question. Are there specific ESG considerations or strategies that differ across industries? For example, oil and gas, financial services, manufacturing. And how can companies in these sectors tailor their approach? Hello?
Hello?
Okay. Did you get my question?
Yes, regarding ESG considerations for different sectors. Of course,
Yes.
it's like I said earlier, it's not just a box tick exercise, and because of that, there are specific industry considerations. For
Mm.
example, in the oil and gas sector, it will be typically focusing on carbon reduction in terms of transitioning to renewable energy and also cleaner energy technologies. And initially it was really discussions around environmental justice and remediation, right? Clean up
Mm.
the oil spills
Yes.
and and and
Yes.
and all that. So for the oil and gas sector is a lot broader than just um, carbon reduction and adopting cleaner technologies. I think there needs to be a lot more work done to carry all the stakeholders along in terms of these ESG considerations and also meeting up with all these goals. We have specific targets that we're supposed to meet up to, especially relating to the UN SDGs in 2030. How close are we to achieving these goals? For the
Sorry.
financial services,
But like I've been tracking it, is moving up and down.
okay, for the financial
Sorry.
services, right here we have a set of Nigerian sustainable banking principles. There are 9 principles which CBN wrote to all the banks in Nigeria, saying that all the banks have to adhere to these 9 principles.
Yes.
Speaking to environmental and social risk management when they are lending, environmental and social footprints in terms of the emissions, and also in terms of how the banks lend and how the banks transact, human rights, women, economic empowerment, allowing women to thrive, and also funding women-led businesses, relating to financial inclusion, and also environmental and social, governance of boards and companies that are, willing to lend and also do business. And there are also special, provisions relating to capacity building as well. You need to train people relating to ESG tenets and also collaborative partnerships, within the banks. And of course, reporting, which is perhaps, the big elephant in the room. How do you report? And sometimes it's difficult to report when you're not doing that much, right? And that's what leads to greenwashing. But when you look at the global, reporting initiatives and GRI, there are set standards on how you should do your reporting as a business. Speaking about the oil and gas and the financial services sector, there's also manufacturing, which would then focus on prioritizing, waste reduction. We then talk about reduce, reuse, recycle, and of course, sustainable sourcing, right? Sustainable sourcing, not just in terms of, procuring the least environmental damaging, products, but also considering MSMEs within the local community when you're procuring. If there's anything that can be gotten, through local content or obtained through local content, there's probably it's a lot cleaner, to procure that as opposed to incurring more environmental costs in terms of emission, in terms of shipping those products into the community, and also innovation as well. We are starting to see a lot of innovative approaches to manufacturing, which also causes or reduces environmental impacts of those activities on the community and also on the environment. Of course, we can then speak to some of these tailored strategies. There are industry benchmarks really for that cut across each of these sectors, which you then have to use when relating with investors and also regulators. The regulation requirements are totally different. Of course, we only have one particular goal of, saving the environment, but in getting to that destination, there are set standards for the cement industry, for example. There are set standards for the telecom sector, and there are set standards for the financial services. So, it's just about looking into what works best and what sort of compliance requirements you're meant to adhere to, and then also going above and beyond that to ensure that the stakeholders are happy and profits, planet, and people are also kept intact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olaniyan. To the next question. How can emerging technologies such as blockchain, AI, or digital tools support companies in improving transparency, efficiency, and accountability in their ESG practices and leadership?
Okay, so this is the question that is, so in my team we have quite a few consultants that we call them Gen Z consultants, and prior to now, when you go to the Federal Ministry of Environment, we'll typically print 20 copies of an ESI report, and if an ESI report, probably 560 pages thereabouts. And it's always a lot of documents, and even in collecting those data sets, you visit different locations collecting air quality, water quality, and soil quality data. But now with the advent of AI, you don't need to do all of that anymore. There's technology that would provide you real-time data on air quality in all the local governments in Lagos State. We've seen some of the work that the Lagos State Employment and Environmental Protection Agency has thrown out in terms of air quality, and also the carbon registry, which they've just launched. And that just speaks to how AI and data analytics and technology is helping decision making, especially relating to ESG. This is changing. Our regulator, National Environmental Standards Enforcement Agency, Nigeria, has like a platform where you just upload all your reporting, and you then start to do your impact mitigation monitoring, which is a lot quicker than it used to be when I first started working as a consultant. So yes, AI and data analytics has really helped in that regard, and also in terms of automating reporting, and also data collection, streamlining, and improving accuracy. Imagine having to go through a bunch of 600 reports for just one cell site, and some of these locations, is not just one. The telecom sector, for example, there are easily about 40,000 or 50,000 base stations within the country. And then if you have to do an environmental audit, on each of those data sets without leveraging technology, it is a lot of work. In the oil and gas sector, there are more sensors, temperature sensors, and even environmental sensors now that immediately detects and then lets that, look, there's a problem here, or there's an environmental problem here, and it needs to be fixed or solved almost immediately. So of course, leveraging technology and digital tools has really helped, and I think that I'm also very excited to see what this would look like in the future. Also speaking to the manufacturing industry, there are softwares like Gabi that's like a life cycle assessment software, wherein you throw in all your data, and then it tells you what the best manufacturing process is with the least amount of emission, in which you can then use to make decisions in terms of manufacturing processes. In doing carbon emission monitoring as well, your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions monitoring, baseline studies, you can't do that without using technology or leveraging technology, in terms of the data sets that you would be working with. And it's really gone a long way in terms of the development that we are seeing within the sector. Right now, NIMET, which is the Nigerian Meteorological Agency, is also relying a lot on technology and AI to be able to get information on what the weather, predictions would be. And then that's been used to help farmers know when to grow and when to harvest their crops. And that's helping with climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience as well. So yeah, there's a lot to speak about, when it comes to AI, and it's essentially limitless. You never know when you can rely on these tools to achieve, those sort of results. And I think what's also important, and what we'd also start to see, is the use of technology in even addressing issues relating to ESGs. We are seeing a lot of waste management companies now leveraging technology to be able to do recycling, for example, especially in the issues of like hazardous waste, where they are very toxic components, your phones, computers, and batteries, for example, wherein when any of these chemicals get emitted into the environment, it becomes very toxic to the people or the community around because of the chemicals or the level of hazardous or toxic elements used in manufacturing those components. So yeah, we are very excited for what is to come, leveraging technology. And then, there are a lot of use cases where companies are starting to use these data tools to fix or make better decisions and predict trends a lot better. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Before we go to your next question, please, if we have any questions or comments, please drop it in your chat box as the speakers are having their different sessions. Thank you. So time is fast spent. Speaking to what you just, your last answer, I hold on to the fact that we need to embrace AI because, the narrative now, everybody is scared about AI coming to take their jobs and all the worst. But what is essential is that it's supposed to be a joint effort. You can utilize AI to help you do your job. Leave certain things that you don't, AI analyzes data, can collect data, analyze it, can take that away and give you time to deal with the strategic part of your sustainability. Thank you. So to the next question, what governance practices are crucial for promoting accountability in ESG initiatives?
Speaking to accountability, and I think Maria touched about this,
Yes,
when she was talking about transparency, and I think this is where the ethical and strategic leadership comes to play. What do you report and how do you report it? Of course, there are a lot of tools around in terms of board oversights, for example, whistleblowing or whistleblower platforms where people can go and actually report stuff. So first is the board oversight, right? Speaking to having an ESG committee at board level. And I also recall that she had said that some organizations don't even have like a chief sustainability officer because that's then ingrained in every single person that works across the business. But sometimes it's also good to just have, an ESG, SPOC, like a person that just does ESG solely. And then that helps in terms of reporting and also governance. Of course, clear metrics and reporting, like I said earlier, there's the GRI, and we're seeing with a lot of companies doing more audits these days and also strengthening accountability. Of course, the regulators, would provide mandatory requirements for you to report. And of course, transparency is very, very important in that regard of, declaring literally everything that happens within the business. Also, the stakeholder engagement is also very important. If you're doing it and you're not reporting it or saying it, then no one knows about it, right? So I think those are the major bits and pieces required. But those audits should not just be when the regulators ask you for it. There's absolutely nothing wrong in doing an in-house audit yourself. And doing that gap analysis sometimes is not just to say, it's not a fault-finding exercise, right? It's finding the facts to get better and taking on the feedback even within the business to do a lot better. A couple of folks are having some conversations around what ESG, is even to businesses, especially at the board level. And it's really, if there's no budget for it, right, it's not going to be done. So having an ESG person, in that board or at senior management level and letting that trickle down is very, very important because that's where you get most of the approvals and that's where you get the tone at the top, then trickling down, into the business to ensure that things are done in the appropriate way. Thank you.
Thank you. It just shows that once you have accountability as the fabric of any corporate organizational culture, if your corporate culture and has accountability as its fabric, you won't wait for an external regulator to check you. It's in your DNA. So you do it, you hold yourself accountable. So it makes it easier when regulators check you or your stakeholders want to engage you on your practices. Thank you. So the final question, how can organizations balance their short-term financial performance with long-term ESG goals?
Okay, balancing short-term financial performance. I like that. We are then talking about money because money it's not really just from the viewpoint of sustainable finance, but actually paying for some of these goals. I think the first important thing is integrating ESG into like your business strategy. And look, it's not just about an an MNE or like a multinational like a Sahara or an MTN or a very big company, right? There are other small companies that also need to start looking at how to integrate ESG into their business strategy. It's not just about being able to pay for the solar panels in a massive office. We are seeing like small barbing salons starting to also have like solar powered clippers, right? We are seeing people doing recycling in the smallest and smallest of scales. So it doesn't have to be a very, very big company for you to start thinking of your short-term financial performance vis-a-vis long-term ESG goals. And the benefits are enormous, right? Even from the waste management viewpoint, from a social and governance viewpoint as well. It's not just about doing those bits and pieces, right? So integrating ESG into business strategy is particularly important because you would be able to reap the benefits of sustainability and also ESG. Like I said earlier, if you think about urban mining, for example, it then tells you that your waste is very, very valuable to you. If, like I said earlier, most of the manufacturing companies are then going back to extract value from materials. So your computers, your printers, Xerox had a massive campaign where they are buying back cartridges because of the gold that's in the cartridges, knowing that it's a lot cheaper for them to collect the recycled cartridges as opposed to mining for virgin gold. So companies can start to look inwards in that regard by integrating ESG and sustainability into core strategy. Scenario planning, just leveraging the sort of risk analysis and looking at your short-term and long-term financial pressures would also help in that regard. The biggest elephant in the room as well, incentives. We have to create a lot of incentives. And this is just not just from macro to micro. We've seen some of the interesting policies that have been out recently. We're also looking forward to newer policies, such as the removal of excise duty on solar panels, for example, because we don't particularly have a vibrant, carbon market right now. So some of these bits and pieces would also help, even within the business. If you see something nice, reward it. So I think those are some of the bits that would really help in terms of the short-term financial performance and then long-term ESG goals.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olaniyan. Thank you so much for your time and all the insights. Then I'll go to my last speaker, Ms. Ejiro Gray. Thank you for your patience. The first question: what potential challenges or resistance might businesses face when shifting towards a culture of transparency and ethical decision-making? And how can they overcome these obstacles to ensure sustainable governance practices?
Yeah. Thank you, Omowunmi. Any shift, any form of transition tends not to be easy, right? So there will be a struggle between the old and the incoming new, right? Now, for companies trying to create that shift towards a culture of transparency and ethical decision making, I think it's even a bit harder because then you're dealing with culture. You're dealing with the way things are done. Simply put, it's really about how we do things around here. I would say that the first major challenge you would face or resistance would be based on the external operating environment, right? Where do you operate? Where do you do your business? And what is the culture in that industry, in that operating environment? If that culture in that industry operating environment is not aligned with the ethical culture you're trying to build or the transparency you're trying to build, then you will find that there will be a struggle, this tug of war between your internal culture and your external culture. Now, that means for you to stand your ground and stick to your guns and say, well, this is the way I want to do business now, right? You must be ready for the pushback that will come. You must be ready to experience delays in getting your approvals and all of that, and in dealing with your stakeholders generally. And you need to factor all of that into your business planning, right? And so a lot of things that probably you would have been able to get away with in the past, you will find that now there will be even more resistance. So if you have started down that path, or you want to start down that path, you make sure you stick to it. But that said, it's also an opportunity to build organizational competence. And I say that because if you're going to, stick to your guns as to what you stand for as an organization, then you must have built your competency to the point that the industry needs you. That sector of the business needs you. Even the regulators recognize the role that you play. And in recognizing that role, they understand that you can't really be trifled with, for lack of a better way to put it. And in that, they need the stability that you bring to that sector or to the industry, because the players there need your services. They need your competence. And so that's a way to balance it out, right? Now, the second type of resistance or challenge that you're likely to face is internal, right? Because in your organization, you're going to have your organizational values, right? Your corporate values. And then the individuals who make up the organization, especially if you're in that stage of the growth of your organization where you're taking a lot of people, right? The growth is not just organic anymore. You're getting involved in things like mergers and acquisitions and all of that. You have to be very intentional about upholding your desired corporate culture, because that corporate culture is being infiltrated from different corners and different sides by people's own personal values, which don't always align with the corporate values. Though at interviews, they will say what you want to hear. They will tell you, oh, yes, in fact, this is the way we are. But in reality, they're coming from other organizations that might have different values. They're coming from other backgrounds that might have different values. And all of these shape the human being, right? And in shaping that human being, it shapes your values, it shapes what you believe in. So in that sort of situation, you must be very intentional, right? As the leadership of the organization in upholding your desired corporate culture. So I think that's really important. Another thing is the cost. It will come at a cost. You wanting to do things ethically, and transparently, it will come at a cost, right? And depending on the kind of industry you're operating, it might come with greater scrutiny, right? From your stakeholders, from potential shareholders, from all of that, because you are now standing for something very clearly. And in this day and age where there's so much access to data, to information, you don't want to be found wanting, right? You don't want to be caught greenwashing or whitewashing, whatever it is. You don't want to be caught on the wrong side of history. So you're going to have to be ready also to, pay the cost or pay the price for instituting that sort of corporate culture. And then I say thirdly, which is linked to the conflict between personal values and corporate values, I said there'll be initial employee apathy and cynicism. That's very likely. The only way that will not happen is if the tone from the top is very strongly aligned with that desired culture change. If it is, then you find that people will generally fall in line, right? Because you know that, okay, it's either shape up or ship out. This is what we stand for. This is what we do. And so when you now have a culture of do as I say, not as I do, it will be dead on arrival. Because that tone from the top is what will set the direction for the rest of the organization. You can't be preaching one thing and then you're doing another. The employees will do as you do, not as you say. So that, I think that in a nutshell is the answer to that.
All right, thank you very much. So for ethical leadership, trying to push an ESG conscious organization, ready to meet with resistance, but stick to your gun, and also do as you say. Thank you very much, Ejiro. So the second question, how does strong corporate governance act as a foundation for the successful integration of ESG practices? And what are the key governance mechanisms companies should adopt?
Okay. So when you talk about integration of ESG practices, you're basically saying you want to integrate certain environmental, social, and governance parameters into the way you do things in your organization, right? And what informs how things are done in the organization primarily are your policies and processes. That basically tells you how decisions are made, what is acceptable, what is not, and then what is the way, what is the process for doing certain things. All that comes under your corporate governance. So when you think about corporate governance, it's about how are decisions made in this organization? How is risk managed? What controls do we have in place in the course of managing our identified risk? So you will find that without corporate governance, you can't truly institute ESG. You can't truly institute sustainability because it is the foundation. It is the core for which every other thing, you now start to set the building blocks. But that corporate governance is the basis on which you're now building, right? In terms of the key governance mechanisms, you want to consider a strong enterprise risk management framework. And that risk management framework must incorporate material ESG issues, right? So ESG needs to be seen as a risk management tool. That should be a core part of your entire organizational risk management framework. Then you want to ensure that you're carrying out external audits. Now, when we talk about external audits, people just tend to think of financial audits, right? So in preparing your annual reports and financial statements, getting the auditors to come in and audit your financial statements. But it's beyond that. You should also include corporate governance audits. There are law firms that carry that out. There are even consulting firms that do that. This corporate governance audit also includes board evaluation. So are you actually evaluating the effectiveness of your board? Or are you just, have you taken the position that, well, the board is law and whatever they say goes and however they do it and they don't need to be checked, but they do need to be checked. You need to ensure that your board is set up for success. You need to ensure that there's inclusivity on your board, right? You need to ensure that you have a good ethics and compliance program that, employees and everyone can then key into to drive the kind of culture you want. And you're going back to the board issue. It's important that you have a diverse and inclusive board, even in your workforce as well, in your decision-making process. Recently, there was the outcry against, I think it was Heinz, right? There was an advert by Heinz, and it didn't represent the Black community, positively. And there was an outcry that, who is, don't you have that inclusive decision-making process where that diversity, where somebody can point out, this will not sit well with this group of stakeholders. Yes. Exactly. Yes. Similarly, there was an issue recently with Bath and Body Works, where there was a candle that it produces towards, in preparation for winter. It's supposed to be snowflakes or snowdin or something. I can't remember the name of the fragrance. But basically, the design of what was meant to be snowflakes on the container looked like KKK hoods. And so there was an outcry that why would you use something like this to represent your brand? And people are questioning, where is the diversity? Where is the inclusivity? Why the importance of these things, because you must have different perspectives, especially where you're a brand where reputation matters a lot. And because of the present age that we live in, where, like I said, there's so much data and information out there, there's easy access, people are more conscious of what is politically correct or what is socially correct. So I think that in summary is why it's so important that you have good corporate governance as the foundation when integrating ESG practices.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Your third question, I feel like you've answered answered it already. You touched on it, but I will still ask. Okay, before I ask the third, please, just a reminder, if we have questions, let's put it in the chat box so that we can take it after the speakers conclude their session. So how can companies foster a corporate culture where employees are actively engaged in promoting ESG values and ethical behavior? What role does leadership play in nurturing such a culture? Like I said, I feel like you've answered this already with your number 1 and 2, but you can just, maybe there's another insight.
I'll touch on it briefly. Right.
Yes, please.
So, there's a Chinese proverb that says the fish rots from the head. And this applies to businesses as well, right? Because everything, the way things are done, is driven by the tone from the top, right? And so you would find that people would say culture is often characterized by the worst behavior the leadership is willing to tolerate. I repeat, culture is often characterized by the worst behavior the leadership is willing to tolerate. So once a behavior is deemed acceptable, either by failure to take action against it, or turning a blind eye, or even rewarding it, you have already subconsciously deemed that to be an acceptable standard of behavior. So if you're trying to get your staff and your employees actively engaged in promoting ESG values and ethical behavior, you cannot afford to turn a blind eye to the things that are inimical to the behavior you're trying to instill. You cannot afford to, just roll over and die or bury your head in the sand when things are happening that you don't agree with or don't agree with the culture you're trying to promote. And it starts from the top. If those at the top are doing it actively, consciously, naturally, like I said, everyone else will fall in line. And then you will find that for those who don't fall in line, the door is clear, the exit path is clear, right? Because even they would feel uncomfortable. Not only that, if you're taking action against unacceptable behavior, they would naturally find their way out of the organization. So at the end of the day, it boils down to reward and correction. What are you promoting? And what are you condemning?
Thank you very much. In line with what you just said, the tone, there's this saying about culture eating strategy for breakfast, right?
Absolutely.
You can have all the strategy in the world, but if you don't have the right culture, it would,
exactly.
You can have that conversation, but it won't translate. Thank you so much. What are the unique challenges small and medium-sized enterprises face in implementing ESG frameworks, and how can they overcome these barriers while remaining financially viable?
Okay, so generally businesses start out small and then they scale up operations, with a view to capturing a significant market share and becoming a major player. And so they need to understand and look at sustainability as the pathway to longevity, right? And that pathway must support your environmental and social license to operate. Now, the thing with MSMEs or SMEs is that on one hand, they may get carried away with, well, I'm just a small business, I'm just making my money quietly, and not bother to put in place the structure required for growth or to support growth. But on the other hand, you could also have the challenge of wanting to do too much at the same time. So why don't you phase it? So you start to incorporate these ESG frameworks and principles in line with your growth trajectory. So start off, for instance, with corporate governance. The basics: separate your personal funds from business funds. Learn to plow back your earnings into the business to grow the business. Start to segregate responsibilities within the business to create the right internal controls, right? You will get eventually to a stage where you require a board of directors so that there's a structured way of decision making that puts checks and balances, right, into the system, and especially where it's an owner-managed organization, right? So like I said, look at your objectives. What are your long-term, short-term, mid-term objectives? And then start to institute processes in line with those objectives. The reality of the world that we live in today is that there's rarely going to be a place or a time that you want to raise funds for business growth that you will not have to cross this hurdle of what are your ESG practices, what are your governance practices. It's a key part of the process. And so if you understand that, you then start to look at how can I integrate this gradually into my core business strategy. So even start with things like, getting audited accounts. You have your accounts audited on an annual basis. Do you remit your taxes? Do you have records of your tax remittance and maintenance and all of that? Are you doing all of that? So as a small business, I think start off with those, right? It puts you in good stead. And then as you grow your business, as you build your capacity, you then start to incrementally add to it. But if you try to do too much at the same time, number one, it's going to be too expensive, right? The resources you need to execute it will come at a huge cost to your wage bill, which you really can't afford. And so what I would say is, like I said, build incrementally. And also in your growth stage, especially when you're still the small or medium business, you want to try and, as much as possible, reduce bureaucracy. So in adding to it, in building incrementally on your ESG, make sure that you are not hindering the agility that is required for a business at your level of growth.
Right. Thank you
That's
so
it.
much. Thank you. So for SMEs, MSMEs, they need to do it in a gradual, it's like a
Yes.
gradual
A
transition.
phased
Start
approach,
with
yes.
so you would, as an owner manager, you should have your own values, and that would translate into your business. Thank you so much. So for your final question, how can directors ensure that they're adequately overseeing ESG risks while preparing for the evolving regulations and standards?
So Maria and Kayode had touched on something like this when they talked about whether some organizations actually have a chief sustainability officer, or whether it's it's integrated into each key person's portfolio, or into each person's portfolio. And whilst it's important that ESG is actually integrated from top to the bottom, right, into everyone's KPIs and all of that, I think it's important that you have responsibility, or a person or a group of people has responsibility for driving it, for cohesion, for coordination. And so the first thing I would say is, for the directors, have a board committee that has responsibility for overseeing ESG, right? It doesn't necessarily even mean that you have to create a separate committee that is named ESG committee. It can form part of the risk management committee's portfolio, right? It can even form part of the audit committee's portfolio. It depends on the corporate governance committee's portfolio. So it depends on whichever way you want to do it. But ensure that that board committee has KPIs for overseeing ESG, because you can't avoid it anymore. With all the geopolitical issues going on in our world today, you can no longer ignore these ESG issues, because they affect it, right? Now we realize that war in some locality can affect a market, miles away, in a different continent. Absolutely. We've seen that with the Russia-Ukraine war and all of that. So it's important that, first of all, you must have a committee, a board committee, that has that strategic oversight. Then you must also understand what your risks are in terms of ESG, right? And usually, excuse me, and usually that would be done based on materiality, because there are a plethora of ESG risk and ESG issues. But you need to understand what is important to my organization, what is important to us as an organization in line with our strategic objectives, and then what is important to our stakeholders as well, right? So understanding those risks helps you to segment them and then start to address them. There's some things that, they're actually opportunities for you to take advantage of. There are others that you don't necessarily have to take action right now because there's not much happening there, but you need to watch that landscape. And there are others that you need to take immediate action on. So it's even understanding the spread of that risk and how it affects your business. That's an obligation or a responsibility for the directors, and which they then need to cascade to management and to the rest of the team, right? So if the board understands ESG to be a risk management tool, it can be the very machinery they need to transform businesses from one generation to transgenerational organizations, especially in this part of the world, in Africa, where we haven't had a lot of businesses that have been able to evolve and survive over the years. Most start out as family-owned businesses, and then when the key decision maker dies, a lot of times it dies with the person. But we want to move away from that. And one of the easiest ways to do that is institutionalization of ESG practices. So the board needs to understand their responsibility in that regard, and prepare for evolving regulations and standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ejiro. I know that we can't afford to behave like ostriches, right? Organizations cannot afford to bury their heads in the ground. This is happening, whether they want or they understand or they want to move with this train, they have to jump on the train. Thank you. We have just 5 minutes left because we have a hard stop at 12:30. So we have just one question. The question is, what makes up an effective ESG framework? Ejiro, can you quickly just take this in a minute? This is the question from Clementina Ramsey. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would say what makes up an effective ESG framework is one that has carefully considered the environment in which the organization does its business, the sort of industry in which it operates, because that would determine its environmental obligations and responsibilities, the sort of communities in which it does business, right? Who it does business with, because this will determine its social obligations as well, its recruitment policies, and even its supply chain. And then, of course, what are the governance practices that you can institute to drive your business? I think one of the most important things is ensuring that whatever the framework you have not sacrificed agility for bureaucracy. It's very important that at any point in time, because of how disruptive the world is and all the changes that are happening on a very frequent basis, your organization is still able to take decisions quickly, swiftly, but well-informed decisions. And that's where agility comes in. So a good ESG framework is one that incorporates the environmental, social, and governance standards based on an assessment and understanding of your business realities and your long-term business goals. And most importantly, your ESG practices or your sustainability strategy must tie into business growth. Anything that doesn't tie into business growth and viability will not stand the test of time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for that insight. I don't know if Kayode, would you like to? Yeah, I can see you raise your hand.
Yes.
Unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just wanted to just add a bit to what Ejiro has just said, and thank you for that. Regarding the ESG framework, is really the intentionality of the leaders of the business. Because if you look at some of the work that Ofsted has done in terms of culture building, which is what drives ESG, looking at masculinity and femininity, and also the cultural distance or the distance between leadership and other members of the business, you then see that when the business or when the leaders of the business infuse and imbibe pro-environmental or sustainability behavior, it then flows or trickles down across the business, right? In some of those studies, and sometimes you hear that businesses that are led by women are more, dedicate more finance, right, in their books towards sustainability, and this really speaks to the intentionality of the leaders of such businesses. So really, infuse it in and then be intentional about it, and then that would then guide the framework. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Maria, do you have anything to chime in here?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think we've said it all. And I think Kayode and Ejiro are fantastic speakers. Pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much to my wonderful speakers. Let me hand over to Damilola.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sanni. A big thank you as well to our speakers, Ejiro Gray, Executive Director, Governance and Sustainability, Sahara Group, Kayode Olaniyan, Principal Consultant, Avant-Garde Innovation and Technology, and of course, Maria Figueiredo of Counsel, CMS Portugal. Thank you very much to everyone who has been a part of today's webinar. I know that it has been insightful. There's been a lot I've personally learned, and I hope that has been the case for you as well. We'd love for you to connect with us at Duale, Ovia, and Alex-Adedipe. We're on social media. You can reach out to us on LinkedIn. Keep up with our activities as a firm. Our handle is Duale, Ovia, and Alex-Adedipe, and on Instagram, DOA Law. Thanks a lot. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thank you, Dami. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day ahead. Bye for now.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone. Have a
you.
lovely day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Lovely day.
Bye.
Bye.